Hey everyone,
That's this guy,
and this is that guy.
and we are the
The
This and That guys.
This is Collection Central.
That is Memory Lane,
This is Hasbro Harbor.
and that is the GI Joe line from Hasbro.
Through the 60s and 70s, the powerhouse names in toys and action figures belonged to Mattel and Hasbro. That is until Kenner came along with the Star Wars action figure line in the late 70s and joined the race.
In 1964, Hasbro's original GI Joe line was launched as a way to compete with Mattel, who had just flooded the market with the first Barbie doll 5 years prior. Comprised of 12-inch scale figures, these dolls were based upon the US military Action Soldier, Action Sailor, Action Pilot, and Action Marine. These men came complete with uniforms and dog tags, later expanding to an entire footlocker of accessories.
The key to the Joe's success lies in the renaming of this doll aimed towards boys to action figures, as a way to avoid boys steering clear from what was considered to be a girl's toy. And this strategy worked. G.I. Joe became and remains one of the biggest selling toys of all time, spanning decades, spreading across multiple media platforms, and most importantly, scaling down in 1982 to 3.75-inch figures. This as a lesson on saving materials and selling millions after Kenner's Star Wars line showed the world how to excite youngsters through sheer number of characters alone.
And so, once again, in response to another entity flooding the market with the latest hot product, Hasbro did a total overhaul of the Joe line. These figures would have the same awesomeness and accessories as the original line, shrunken down to produce a more affordable toys for collecting larger quantities and making vehicles and playsets that were actually within a price range for parents that was feasible.
As every 80s heavy hitting toy line did, the Joes would receive their own comic and cartoon series aimed at these kids to build backgrounds to their favorite characters, and of course, to advertise the latest releases on shelves of said toys. G.I. Joe, a real American hero, was the new tagline, and new enemies were introduced to battle the Joes in the form of an organization known as Cobra.
Each Joe and Cobra agent were released either on cardback or included as a pilot for a vehicle or battle station. From the individuality of the team members, Joe or Cobra, to the armaments, accessories, and sometimes even pet sidekicks for each character, their history was fully laid out on collectible file cards which you could cut from the back of the package and file away. With this brilliant strategy, G.I. Joe became the most unique line to ever hit toy stores, and Hasbro would remain at the top of the toy industry to this day.
As previously stated, the 1982 Joe line would catapult the characters into houses the world over. The first wave of Joes consisted of 13 members, including Hawk, before he was promoted to head of the team, Snake Eyes, Short Fuse, Stalker, and Zap. Dressed in basic greens and grays, some released with missile launching weaponry, others with a simple gun, these 13 Joes have become some of the most sought after and hard to afford Joe memorabilia.
The next wave would be a little more diverse in color schemes and occupations in 1983 with the release of figures such as mail-in exclusive First Sergeant Duke Hauser, Torpedo the Navy SEAL, and Snowjob the Arctic Trooper, expanding to an even larger roster from 84 to 87 with the likes of Missile Specialist Bazooka, Covert Operations Officer Lady J, or the Sailor Shipwreck with his unwitting companion Parrot Polly.
And what of Cobra? Well, in the early stages, Cobra wasn't exactly the grand concept it would later become. The first wave of Cobra in 1982 literally consisted of three figures: Cobra Commander, Cobra Officer, and Cobra Soldier. Yeah, not much on the way of variety in your villains. So the idea seemed clear: stockpile an army of soldiers and officers, placing the commander in charge.
But come 1983 onward, we would see Cobra gaining some semblance of ground on the Joes, as we were finally introduced to a more diverse range of characters beginning to join the ranks with figures such as Wild Weasel, pilot of the Rattler, heads of the Crimson Guard, Tomax and Zaymot, and the loose cannons of the Swamp, the Dreadnoks, amongst many others.
The following year would see the end of the original cartoon run, released by Sunbow Entertainment and Marvel Productions and consisting of approximately 95 episodes and two miniseries, which included a movie tie-in initially meant to kill off a beloved character, namely First Sergeant Duke, and introduce an array of new faces. But after the infamous debacle that was the Transformers movie released just months prior, which tried to do the exact same thing when they killed off fan and kid favorite Optimus Prime and most of his Autobots to devastated children nationwide, Let's just say Duke only wound up in a brief coma, and the Joe movie went straight to the small screen and VHS tape.
But this didn't stop the toy shelves from bursting at the seams with new Joe and Cobra figures. Between the hype of the action figures and the popularity of the cartoon series, now even celebrity faces have begun to get in on the game, with recruits the likes of wrestling icon Sergeant Slaughter joining the Joes in '86 and William the Fridge Perry enlisted in '87. Also sprinkled in with great frequency throughout these years were several vehicles, bunkers, and playsets, including what would become the holy grail of Joe and toy collectors decades later. We're talking the Mauler,
The Hiss,
the Sky Striker,
the Trouble Bubble,
the Killer Whale,
the Cobra Moray,
the Snowcat,
the Night Raven,
the G.I. Joe headquarters,
the Cobra 6-in-1 Hammerhead,
the Joe Mobile Command Center,
the Cobra Technodrome,
and the Grail itself, the G.I. Joe USS Flag aircraft carrier.
Measuring 3.5 feet wide by 7 feet long, you're gazing upon the largest and what some would consider to be the greatest playset ever released. From the detailed equipment inside the bridge to the upper decks and swiveling doors, Admiral Keelhaul can man the station with plenty of Joes already. But the real beauty is in the accompanying launch platform. With the playset being a flagship, the launch pad is the area where all the action can take place. With enough space to all at once show off and display jets, tanks, downcraft, pogo balls, refueling vehicles, and mobile armories, you'll find you still somehow have enough room to throw in plenty of hand-to-hand or weapon-ready fight scenes to create something like what we like to call Assault on the Flag.
In 1989, an all-new cartoon series would pick up directly where the original left off, albeit produced by Deke instead of the original pairing of Sunbow and Marvel. This new series would introduce an all-new list of recruits on both sides, intermingled with new versions of old favorites. Debuting with another miniseries in 1989, the series itself would debut in 1990 and last 2 seasons, airing 44 episodes. And ceaselessly following were the toys. New figures, new vehicles, new playsets.
In 1994, the 3.75-inch line of G.I. Joe was finally canceled, but G.I. Joe itself would prove to endure. Joes have seen re-releases by offshoot companies such as Reaction. We've even seen crossovers in comics with Hasbro's G.I. Joe, Transformers, and Kenner mask lines, Hasbro having absorbed Kenner in 1991.
This would lead to some special debuts, such as the 2008 release of Mask Leader Matt Tracker on the Joe team as a nod to the gained IP. Even all-new nostalgic 12-inch figures have been released upon different occasions.
All of this has culminated in the latest series of the line, the G.I. Joe Classifieds, which has become their new benchmark in adult collectible Joe figures and the Joe's return to glory. These 6-inch Joe and Cobra figures carry all the nostalgia of the original characters, with the up-to-date articulation and loose accompanying accessories to rival the figures of McFarlane and NECA Real Toys.
With this new line, coupled with the amount of adult collections and dealers of vintage figures, not to mention debuts, sequels, and possibly even reboots and spin-offs on film, the Joe community is, was, and remains America's #1 highly trained special mission force.